Hi, I'm Emily Carter, and on my 28th birthday, my family gave my sister a brand new BMW and me, a used blender, so I gave them a letter that cost them everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into how one chipped appliance finally shattered a lifetime of lies. The air in my father's backyard was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and grilled steak. It was a perfect California Sunday, the kind that magazines sell you, with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. This was supposed to be my party, mine and Sarah's. Our birthdays were only a week apart, a fact my stepmother, Margaret, had used for years as a convenient excuse for joint celebrations. It was efficient, she'd say, her voice smooth as glass, but we all knew the truth. It was just an easier way to make sure her daughter, Sarah, always remained the star of the show. I stood by the overladen gift table, a glass of lukewarm champagne in my hand, watching them. My father, a man who had faded into the background of his own life, was laughing a little too loudly at a joke one of his business partners told, and Margaret, a hawk in pastel linen, was gliding through the crowd. Her smile a carefully calibrated weapon. She looked every bit the gracious hostess, the loving matriarch. But I knew what lay beneath. I'd seen it in the flicker of her eyes when she looked at me, in the subtle ways she'd erased every trace of my real mother from this house. Time for presents. Margaret clapped her hands, a signal that brought the small crowd to a hush. Her voice was like honey laced with something sharp. Sarah, my half-sister, bounced on the balls of her feet, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun like a halo. She was turning 22, and the world had always been her oyster, served on a silver platter by her mother. She shot me a quick, almost pitying glance. We weren't enemies. Not really. We were more like two strangers who happened to share a father. Her life was a sun-drenched beach. Mine was the rocky, shadowed cove just around the bend. For you, my darling, Margaret said, handing Sarah a small, elegant box. Inside was a key fob with the iconic blue and white logo. Sarah gasped. A performance of pure, unadulterated joy. My father then led her to the driveway, where a gleaming white BMW 3 Series sat with a giant red bow on its hood. The crowd erupted in oohs and ahs. Sarah was crying, hugging Margaret. Then my father. It was a perfect family moment, a snapshot for a life I was never truly a part of. I clapped along, the sound of my own hands feeling distant and foreign. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, the lone, quiet daughter standing in the shadow of the new car. They were probably wondering what a successful, independent 28-year-old would get. A down payment on a condo? A trip to Europe? After the excitement died down, Margaret finally turned to me. The brilliant smile she had for Sarah had been dialed down to something more reserved, more dutiful. And Emily, dear, we didn't forget you. She gestured to a lumpy object wrapped in leftover Christmas paper. It had been sitting on the edge of the table, almost an afterthought. I already knew it would be something like this. The previous year, it was a set of dish towels. The year before, a generic gift card to a department store. The disparity was the point. It was a public demonstration of my place in the hierarchy. I tore off the paper. Underneath was a blender. Not a new one in a shiny box. It was just the blender itself. An old, cream-colored Osterizer, its plastic base yellowed with age. I picked it up. There was a significant chip on the corner of the heavy glass pitcher's lid. My breath caught in my throat. My stomach twisted into a knot of ice and fire. I recognized this blender. It was my mother's. The one she used to make me strawberry smoothies in the mornings before she died. It had sat in the back of a kitchen cabinet for 20 years, a forgotten relic. And now, it was being presented to me as a birthday gift. Not as a precious heirloom, but as a piece of secondhand junk, a cast-off. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. It was Margaret's way of saying, even your mother's memory is mine to give away. It's worthless. Just like you. A wave of nausea washed over me. The polite smiles of the guests felt like daggers. I could feel their pity, their secondhand embarrassment. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah was too busy taking selfies with her new car to notice. It still works perfectly, Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I thought you'd appreciate something with a bit of history. I looked from the chipped lid to her perfectly composed face. For the first time in my life, the years of quiet resentment, of swallowing my pain, crystallized into something hard and sharp. The anger was so pure, so clarifying, it felt like a jolt of electricity. They thought this would be another humiliation I'd just quietly accept. They had no idea what they had just done. They hadn't just given me a used blender. They had given me a reason, a weapon. In that moment of profound, public degradation, I didn't want to scream or cry. I wanted to burn their world to the ground. I smiled, a tight, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. Thank you, Margaret, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I can't tell you how much this means to me. And as I held my mother's blender, I decided they wouldn't get a tear or a tantrum. They would get a letter that would change everything. The drive back to my small apartment in the city was a blur. The heavy, chipped blender sat on the passenger seat, a silent, accusing passenger. Each red light, each slow driver, felt like a personal affront, stretching the time I had to sit with the roaring in my ears and the cold fury in my gut. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the freeway, but all I could see was the ghost of my mother's smile in the reflection of the glass pitcher. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment I had worked 2 jobs to afford through college. It was my sanctuary, a space that Margaret had never set foot in, a place where no memories of her existed. I carried the blender inside and set it on my small kitchen counter. It looked absurdly out of place next to my modern coffee maker and stainless steel toaster. It was a relic from another time, another life, my life. I ran my fingers over the chip on the lid, the very same chip I'd made myself when I was 6, trying to sneak a peek at the strawberry smoothie my mother, Helen, was making. I remembered her laughter, not anger. She'd knelt down, wiped a smudge of pink from my nose, and said, "Now it has character, just like us. M." That memory, so clear and pure, was immediately followed by the suffocating fog of what came after. The hushed phone calls, the sudden illness, the way the light in our house seemed to just go out. My father, lost in his grief, had been an easy target for Margaret, his sympathetic colleague who was suddenly always there with a casserole and a comforting hand on his arm. She had moved into our lives as seamlessly as a snake shedding its skin, and with her came Sarah, her quiet, watchful daughter, slowly, methodically. Margaret began her campaign of erasure. My mother's clothes vanished from the closets. Her favorite armchair was reupholstered. The vibrant, colorful paintings she'd hung on the walls were replaced with sterile, beige landscapes. When I'd asked where Mom's things were going, Margaret had smiled that tight, patient smile, and said, "We need to make room for the future. Emily, it's not healthy to dwell on the past." But this blender had survived. It was too mundane, too utilitarian to be seen as a threat. It had been relegated to the pantry of the forgotten at the back of the kitchen. alongside expired cans of pumpkin puree and a waffle iron that no one had used since 1998. And now, it was here. Re-gifting it wasn't just a thoughtless act, it was a calculated one. It was Margaret taking the last physical piece of my mother I had a connection to in that house and assigning it a new value. Trash. A birthday present for the daughter who didn't matter. I plugged it in. The cord was stiff and old. I flicked the switch. The motor roared to life with a startling, grinding sound, filling my quiet apartment with the noise of a bygone era. It smelled of dust and old oil, but underneath it all, I could almost swear there was a faint, ghostly scent of strawberries. In that moment, the grief and anger I had suppressed for 2 decades came rushing to the surface. It wasn't a wave, it was a tsunami. I saw every birthday where my gift was a fraction of Sarah's. I felt every holiday where I was seated at the end of the table. I heard every backhanded compliment, every subtle dig, every single instance where I was made to feel like a guest in my own father's home. The car wasn't the point. The blender wasn't even the point anymore. The point was the cruelty, the systematic, patient, and deliberate chipping away at my worth, my history, and my mother's memory. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just take it, go back to my little apartment and cry. For 20 years, they had been right. But as the blender's motor whirred, something inside me shifted. The hurt was still there, a deep, foundational ache. But for the first time, it wasn't paralyzing me. It was fueling me. This wasn't just another birthday, another insult. This was an exhumation. Margaret had, in her infinite arrogance, dug up a ghost, and that ghost was demanding to be heard. I turned off the blender. The silence that followed was heavy with purpose. I walked over to my laptop, opened a new document, and typed the salutation. Margaret. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to use my words. I was going to write a letter that would serve as a final accounting for 2 decades of pain. I would detail every single slight, every erased memory, every casual act of cruelty. And I would end it with a truth so devastating, so completely unexpected, that it would tear down the foundation of the comfortable life she had built on the ashes of mine. She thought she knew me. She thought I was a broken, sad little girl. She had no idea I'd spent years quietly gathering stones. Now, I was finally ready to throw them. The words came out not in a trickle, but in a flood. For hours, I sat at my small desk, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, the only other light coming from the street lamp outside my window. The chipped blender on the counter was my silent witness, a grim muse. Every time my resolve wavered, I'd look at it and the fire would return, hotter than before. I started with the day she moved in. I wrote about how she'd packed my mother's books into boxes and labeled them donations. How she'd told me my mother's rose garden was too much work and had it paved over for a patio. I didn't write with flowery, emotional language. I wrote like a prosecutor building a case, using cold, hard facts. I listed dates, specific quotes, and incidents that had been seared into my memory. On October 12th, 2006, you told me my mother's death was probably a relief for my father, who could now move on. I was 9. For my 16th birthday, you and Dad gave Sarah a weekend trip to Vegas with her friends. You gave me a book on improving my social skills. You handed it to me in front of her friends, saying you were worried about my shyness. I wrote about the Christmases, the Thanksgivings, the way my father slowly disappeared, becoming her silent, complicit partner. I wrote about how she'd cultivated an image of a perfect, blended family to the outside world, while inside the walls of that house, she ran a quiet, psychological war against a child. As I typed, I was transported back in time. I was a teenager again, feeling lost and invisible in that big house. And I remembered the day I found the first piece of my real defense. I was 15, searching for an old photo album in the attic, a place Margaret never went because of the dust, tucked away in a forgotten steamer trunk under a pile of my father's old college sweaters. My fingers brushed against a book that felt different. It wasn't a photo album. It was a leather-bound journal with my mother's initials, H.C., embossed in faded gold. Her diary. My hands had trembled as I opened it. Her elegant, looping script filled the pages. At first, it was what I expected. Notes about her garden. Funny things I'd said as a child. Her love for my father. But as I read closer to the end, the tone shifted. It grew fearful, anxious. She wrote about Margaret, who was then just a new colleague of my father's. Margaret invites herself over for dinner again. One entry read, "She looks at our home with a strange sort of hunger in her eyes. David thinks she's just being friendly, but when she looks at me, I feel like she's measuring me for a coffin." The words had sent a chill down my spine. My mother, who I remembered as vibrant and fearless, had been scared. Another entry, just 2 weeks before she was hospitalized for the sudden illness that took her life, was even more chilling. David seems so taken with her. She tells him I'm being paranoid, that the stress is making me unwell. Maybe she's right, but I feel like I'm being slowly poisoned, not by a sickness, but by her presence. I did something today, something just for Emily. I went to see Mr. Abernathy, our old family lawyer. I made sure Emily will be protected, no matter what happens. I put it in a letter, a final one, and he's promised to keep it safe. Just in case my fears are more than just fears. Finding that diary was like finding a map and a key. It recontextualized everything. My mother hadn't just faded away. She had fought. She had seen the danger and had tried to protect me from beyond the grave. For years, I had held on to this secret, waiting. I wasn't sure what it all meant, but I knew it was important. When I turned 18, I had quietly sought out Mr. Abernathy. He was retired, a kind, elderly man who remembered my mother fondly. He confirmed he held a sealed document from her, with instructions not to release it to me until my 28th birthday, a date that once seemed a lifetime away. Now, sitting at my laptop, I typed that final, devastating part of the letter. "You built your kingdom on a lie, Margaret. You thought you had won. You took my home, my father, and you even tried to take my mother's memory by handing me her blender like it was a piece of junk from a garage sale. You probably felt so clever, so secure. But my mother was smarter than you. She was stronger than you. And she saw you coming. She wrote about you in her diary. You know, she wrote about her fear of you. And she also wrote about the visit she paid to her lawyer, Mr. Abernathy. Just before she died, she left him with her actual, final, notarized last will and testament. Not the convenient early draft that you and my father used, the one that left him everything so you could get your hands on it. The real one. The instructions were clear. The will was to be held in trust and delivered to me on my 28th birthday. How's that for timing? The deed to the house. The ownership of the land it sits on. The remaining investments. They're not yours. They were never my father's to share with you. They're mine. They've always been mine. I hit print. The hum of the printer was the only sound. 3 pages of ink and paper. 3 pages that would detonate the life they had so carefully constructed. The letter wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about justice. A justice my mother had orchestrated 2 decades ago, waiting for her daughter to be old enough and strong enough to see it through. The next morning, I didn't mail the letter. An act of this magnitude required a personal touch. I drove the 40 minutes back to the suburbs, the 3 pages sitting on the passenger seat where the blender had been the day before. The sky was an indifferent, washed-out gray. My anger from the night before had cooled into a solid, heavy certainty in the pit of my stomach. I was no longer a victim seeking revenge. I was an executor of a long-overdue will. I pulled up to the house. The pristine white BMW was parked in the driveway, a monument to their arrogance. I walked up the stone path my mother had designed and rang the doorbell my mother had chosen. My father answered. He looked tired, his eyes puffy. He was probably expecting me to come back, tail between my legs, to apologize for my ungrateful attitude or to hash things out. Emily, he started, a weary, placating tone in his voice. About yesterday. This is for Margaret, I said, cutting him off. I held out the plain white envelope. My voice was flat, devoid of the emotion he was used to. Make sure she reads it. He took it, looking confused. Can't you just come in and talk? There's nothing left to talk about, I said, turning my back and walking away before he could respond. The walk back to my car felt like the longest walk of my life, but with every step, I felt a layer of old weight sloughing off. I didn't look back. I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of limbo, cleaning my apartment, going for a long walk, trying not to think. The silence was deafening. I expected a call, a text, something. But there was nothing. By evening, I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Maybe they'd just laughed it off, thrown the letter away, and dismissed it as the ramblings of a bitter, unhinged daughter. The call finally came at 9:47 p.m. It wasn't my father. It was Margaret. Emily? Her voice was completely different from the smooth, condescending tone I was used to. It was thin, reedy, and laced with a panic she was failing to conceal. I'm here, I said calmly, sitting down on my sofa. I've read your letter. She spat the word out like it was poison. This is insane. You're insane. What is this? Some kind of sick joke? A threat? Was giving me my dead mother's blender for my birthday a joke? Margaret? I asked, my voice still quiet. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. I had her off balance. That has nothing to do with this. You're lying. This story about a secret will, it's a fantasy. Your father and I have the legal documents. The house is ours. You have a draft. An old one. I corrected her gently. I have the final, notarized will, executed by Helen Carter and witnessed by 2 paralegals at the firm of Abernathy and Sons. It was delivered to me this morning by Mr. Abernathy's successor. It seems my 28th birthday was the trigger for its release. It supersedes your documents completely. It makes me the sole heir to my mother's estate, which, as you know, included this house and all the property it sits on. You've been living in my house. Margaret. Silence. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, the frantic sifting through 20 years of confident ownership, searching for a flaw in my story and finding none. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Your father would never allow this, she finally managed, her voice cracking. My father has no say in the matter, I replied. He unknowingly violated the terms of my mother's real will the moment he treated her assets as his own after marrying you. Legally, he's in a very precarious position. So are you. I own the roof over your head. I own the ground under your new patio. I even, technically, own the driveway that Sarah's new BMW is parked on. A strangled sound came from her end of the line. It was the sound of pure, undiluted terror. The sound of a queen realizing she's been checkmated. What do you want? She whispered. All pretense of aggression gone. replaced by the raw fear of a cornered animal. Money? Is that it? We can work something out. We can arrange something. The offer hung in the air. The old Emily would have been tempted. The old Emily would have been scared, overwhelmed. But as I sat there, looking at the chipped blender on my counter, a reminder of both the deepest insult and the ultimate vindication, I felt nothing but a profound, cold clarity. "I'll be in touch," I said, and I hung up the phone. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a negotiation. I didn't give her the comfort of a number she could bargain with. I left her in the silence, in the house that was no longer hers, to grapple with the fact that the little girl she had spent 2 decades trying to crush now held her entire world in the palm of her hand. The next 2 days were a masterclass in desperation. My phone blew up. First, it was Margaret, leaving a string of voicemails that cycled through threats of legal action, tearful pleas for mercy, and rambling offers of financial settlement. Then came my father, his messages laced with a pathetic blend of confusion and guilt. "Emily, please, we're a family. We can't let lawyers and papers get between us. Your mother wouldn't have wanted this." His words, meant to guilt me, had the opposite effect. My mother wanted exactly this, I thought. She planned for it. Finally, they showed up. On a Tuesday night, the doorbell to my apartment buzzed insistently. I looked through the peephole, and there they were, standing awkwardly in the hallway of my modest building. Margaret's face was pale and drawn, her expensive clothes looking out of place. My father just looked defeated. I opened the door but blocked the entrance with my body. "We need to talk," Margaret said, trying to force a calm, reasonable tone that was completely undermined by the panic in her eyes. "I don't think we do," I said. "My lawyer will be sending you an official notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." 30 days? My father gasped. "Emily, where are we supposed to go? That's our home." "It was my mother's home," I corrected him, my voice unwavering. "And now it's my home. You were tenants, and your lease is up." Margaret's composure finally snapped. "You vindictive little brat," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "After everything we've done for you, we raised you." "You raised me?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You tolerated me. You housed me and fed me while systematically trying to erase any part of me that resembled my mother. You gave my sister a BMW and you gave me a used blender, her blender, as a statement of my worth to you. Don't you dare stand in the hallway of the apartment I paid for and tell me you raised me. You haunted me." I looked past her to my father, whose gaze was fixed on the floor. "And you," I said, my voice softening with a final, dying ember of pity. "You let her do it. You stood by and watched. That's something you'll have to live with." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry, Emily. I am so sorry." "I know," I said, and in a way, I did. But sorry couldn't rebuild the house of my childhood. It couldn't give me back the years of feeling like an outsider. It was a word that had come 20 years too late. "I'll buy the car back from Sarah," Margaret blurted out. A last, desperate gamble. "We'll give you the money. We'll give you more money. Just name a price. Don't do this." I looked at her, at this woman who had wielded power and money like a weapon for so long, now reduced to trying to buy her way out of a mess of her own making, and I felt nothing. The anger was gone, replaced by a vast, quiet sense of release. It was never about the money, it was about reclaiming my story. "The house is being listed for sale on Friday," I said. "The contents will be sold or donated. You have 30 days. A moving truck is a good place to start." I closed the door on their stunned faces, shutting out their protestations and their pleas. I leaned against it, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I felt a sense of profound peace settle over me. I walked over to the kitchen counter and looked at the old, chipped blender. It was more than just a catalyst. It was a symbol of a mother's foresight, of a daughter's resilience. It was ugly and old and chipped, but it was real. It was mine. I decided I would keep it, not as a reminder of the pain, but as a reminder that even after 20 years, the truth, like a sturdy old motor, still works. I wasn't that broken little girl anymore. I was Emily Carter, the woman who owned her past, and for the first time, truly owned her future. It's been 6 months since I closed the door on Margaret and my father. True to my word, the house was sold. I never stepped foot in it again. My lawyer handled everything. The proceeds, a substantial amount, now sit in an account in my name, a quiet testament to my mother's final act of love. I used a small portion of it to buy a little cottage by the sea, a place with a small garden where I plan to plant roses, just like she used to have. The rest of it is for the future, a future I get to build on my own terms. I never spoke to them again. I heard through the grapevine that they moved into a small, rented condo across town. Sarah had to sell the BMW. I feel a strange sense of detachment about it all. The fiery need for justice has cooled into the quiet embers of peace. I realize now that the true victory wasn't taking the house or the money. It was taking back my own narrative. It was refusing to be the tragic, forgotten daughter in their story, and finally becoming the hero of my own. Sometimes, family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you build for yourself out of truth, respect, and peace. The quiet mornings in my new home, with the sound of the waves in the distance, are worth more than any inheritance. What does the word family truly mean to you? Have you ever had to cut ties to find your own peace? Let me know your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter.